Alrighty, we might make a start. So thanks everyone again for joining us at today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about preparing for assessment success in VCE Chemistry. And we're very lucky today to be joined by two of our authors for the new Chemistry for VCE series, Carolyn Drennan and James Kennedy. All right, before we begin, I just wanted to recognise the diverse traditional lands on which we are each located. We acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands and we pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, recognising the elders past, present and emerging. But we'll just start with a quick introduction. So our first speaker is Carolyn Drennan. Carolyn, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Hi everyone, thanks for joining this afternoon. I'm the Science Domain Leader at Layla North Secondary College. I've also been teaching VCE Chemistry for about 9 years in total. I'm also a member of the Early Careers Chemistry Network program and in my role as a university liaison, and I've also written for Oxford for the Queensland curriculum, responsible for the student book in units 3 and 4, but I've also written for the unit 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 books in this current series. Thank you.
And we've also got James.
Hi there, I'm James Kennedy, and as you can tell from my accent, I was born in the UK, and I've been teaching VCE Chemistry in Melbourne's private schools for 10 years now, including Haileybury, Monash College and Loreto. I've also authored some other chemistry books as well, my latest one being called Everything is Natural, which was published by the Royal Society of Chemistry in the UK last year. Everything is Natural is partly a celebration of how chemistry improves our lives, and partly an investigation into how some people have become so skeptical and even afraid of chemistry. And this place here, this is my tuition center. This is what I do on the weekends. I do chemistry experiments with middle school and VCE kids. Hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, James and Carolyn. Quick introduction on my end as well. My name's Alina. I'm a science publisher at Oxford University Press. I don't have much of a background in teaching, but I definitely have one in science, having just wrapped up a PhD in pharmaceutical science. And with that, we'll just dive straight into the webinar. So the first part of this webinar, we thought we'd just give a quick overview of assessment in VCE Chemistry. We'll talk about what's different compared to the old study design. Then we'll dive into planning for internal assessment. We'll talk a bit about external assessment and how we can support you to help students achieve the success there. Then we'll give you a bit more information about the Chemistry for VCE series. And at the very end, you'll have the opportunity to pick the brains of our presenters today in a Q&A. So if you think of any questions, make sure to pop them into the chat and we'll make sure to address them when we reach Q&A. All right, so with that, we'll just get started with the first part of the webinar, which is how are students assessed in VCE Chemistry Units 1 and 2, as well as 3 and 4. So just hand over to James to talk through this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So each of the units requires a minimum of 50 hours of study, and this includes at least 10 hours of practical investigation and 7 hours for the completion of outcome 3. So changes from the assessment structure in the previous study design, not that there are many great changes, but there's now the inclusion of a response to a selected investigation topic, which you can see in Unit 1, and there's the presentation poster in Unit 2, presentation or poster. And there's another poster in Unit 4. So we'll go through these in today's webinar, but Oxford's Chemistry for VCE set of products equips teachers and students with plenty of guidance and examples to administer these types of assessment.
Now moving on to part 2, how can I best support my students for internal assessments? Carolyn?
Yes, sorry. We've, in the VCE for Chemistry series, we have teaching programs to help plan lessons and achieve the 50 hours of class time per unit. We have many options for the practicals. So our practical types include literature reviews, case studies, we've got some simulations in there. We've also got controlled experiments, including the opportunity to manipulate all the variables in that investigation for further extension. We've got classification and identification practical activities. We've also got product, process and system development activities, and also modelling ones with concrete materials. With a focus on at least one task on sustainability, which is provided in the toolkit in Chapter 1. So we've got support for Outcome 3, including a step-by-step guide to conducting the research investigation, which is in Unit 1, Chapter 10, and also the student design investigation in Unit 2, Chapter 18. Okay, so for our internal assessment guidance, we've focused around 4 mandated SAC types in Unit 3-4, which you can build the students up in Unit 1-2. So there's a comparison and evaluation of chemical concepts, methodologies and methods, which is like comparing 2 practical activities. We've got analysis and evaluation of primary or secondary data, which is mostly from a controlled experiment, but can be from secondhand data from the internet. We've also got problem solving and calculations. That's normally covered in a topic test, and also analysis and evaluation of a media, like could be a media case study, a socio-scientific issue, a research study, or an innovation. So all of these 4 tasks you can start practicing in Unit 1 and 2 using our VCE for Chemistry series. All right, so for the first one, comparison and evaluation of chemical concepts from at least 2 practical activities, I would advise comparing those 2 practical investigations from the same area of study. For example, you could have 2 water pracs, compare those, comparing to all 3 from the acids and bases unit or the redox unit. You'd scaffold the comparison for the students with structured questions using the 25-50-25 format. So 25% of your questions are the remember, understand level, the 50% at the apply and explain level, and then the last 25% at the analyse, evaluate and problem solve level. So the complexity starts off low and then gradually builds up, and that's to make sure that you're giving students the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge at each different level. Okay, so for the analysis and evaluation of data, the collection of primary data from a practical investigation usually takes 1 or at least 1 lesson, depending on the length of the investigation. So it's normally something that you'd set, give the equipment, outline your instructions. I would give the practical investigation an opportunity for students to work collaboratively, but they would conduct the data analysis, the calculations and the discussion with the conclusions under test conditions, so that you'd separate them and make them work quietly, only because when you mark this assessment, it's an individual task, as in Year 12, the expectations is Year 12. You'd also scaffold the data analysis and calculations for students with structured questions. So you'd start off with write a ballast equation for the reaction for a start, and then for a stoichiometry question, you would say calculate the amount of moles of reactant used, the amount of moles of product used, etc. With the practical investigation, though, you need to discuss any measurement errors, precision, accuracy, repeatability, reducibility, and validity. Resolution and of your collected data should all be included, and we give opportunities for students to do that in Units 1 and 2 so that they're prepared, ready in Year 12 to go further.
All right, so I'll just mention this slide here. This is your chance as a teacher to prepare the students for something to prepare them for the written examination at the end of year 12. So traditionally schools will have done quite a lot of this type of assessment. I mean, it's a test essentially, although the name says problem solving, including all of that, everything in the box, but it's essentially a test. In the new study design, you can't do this every single time. You have to have a variety of the different assessment types. But I give the following tips, right? So emulate the written exam in this particular type of assessment as much as possible. So this means things like giving them the latest version of the new data book. And I feel like there might be a new data book coming out for the new study design. Probably it's going to have a little bit more in it. That would be my guess, to follow the other states in Australia. So give them the new data book to work with. Use the 25, 50, 25 rule of difficulty. In my experience, the written exam for year 12 actually sets questions at roughly according to this sort of distribution. So some of them very, very easy. There was a question one year on draw a sucrose molecule. I mean, it's almost copying from the data book. That's the lowest 25%. Anybody who was sort of paying attention in class should get those 25% correct. The 50% test's the middle, and the top 25 is the very difficult parts. Question 9 and 10 comes to mind. We'll get to that in a moment. Section A and section B. So try to emulate the exam again. So 1/4 of the marks should be multiple choice. That's roughly 10 marks. And then section B should be roughly 30 marks for short response type questions. Give reading time as well, right? So you don't, in my experience as a teacher, you don't often give the students reading time. The students may not even want reading time. You know, the first question is, can we start? But having reading time, you have reading time in the exam. You should train the students to use that effectively, because there's a lot they can do in that time. It's a time to assess the difficulty of the questions, which ones you want to do first and last. Some students don't do the exam in order. It's also a time to properly read all the questions and either consciously or subconsciously actually solve some of them in your head. So it's a valuable time you get in the exam. Train the students early, give them 5 minutes reading time in the SACs as well. Another tip I have is don't have a SAC for one period. This is a problem I've seen in a couple of schools where they'll write one period. And this has all sorts of problems, things like travel time not being included. You know, so students, you know, if you've only got one bell between the periods, you end up losing minutes. Some of the periods are at different lengths, at different campuses, or at different days of the week, and this has been a problem. So my advice is to set the SAC for so it fits comfortably within a period at your school. So, for example, 50 plus 5 minutes would fit very well within a 72-minute period, but obviously design it for whatever timetable structure your school has. One last thing will be security, right? So I've got here, have all the classes do it the same day. In my experience, and I've done the statistics on this, a lot of the leakage, as I would call it, of questions actually happens overnight. And I think my theory on this is if a class does it before recess and then another class does the same test after recess, yes, during recess, they may have time to come out and go, oh, there's a question on an electrochemical cell. It's got QH2 as the, they'll start to leak all this info to the other class, but the other class doesn't have the time to look up the answers or ask their tutor. So actually, statistically, and I've looked in the schools I've worked at, there's no advantage to a class if they do the SAC on the same day after another class. However, the next day is a problem because overnight they've got all the time to look up answers and things from what they've heard from the previous class. So the next day, I would strongly advise against doing the same paper. If you have the class, if you have another class doing the SAC the next day, have it equitable, right? So do a similar difficulty paper, but obviously, ideally, just get everyone doing it at the same time in the gym or whatever you can figure out. It's never easy, but ideally have them do it at the same time. If you can't do that, do it the same day. Failing that, you got to write different versions of the paper and then moderate. Also swap, so make sure one class isn't doing it last every time because that's not fair. Last thing, have a teacher actually sit the SAC as a student. So, I mean, add up all the molecular masses with the same calculator as the students, do it under timed conditions. Do it as a student because that way you pick up every single one of the typos, the errors, the maths that doesn't quite add up. It's very tempting to eyeball a SAC paper and go, yeah, this looks fine. But the only real way to get it guaranteed error-free is to sit it or have one teacher sit it as a student with fully written out marking schemes, and that helps the new teachers as well. So, all right, next slide, please. All right, so this is one of my favorites because recently I've been getting into question 9 and question 10. Now, I would personally, and I do this with my own students, I call them section C, because you've got section A, the multiple choice, then you've got section B, which in my mind is questions 1 to 8. And then when you get to question 9, it's completely different. And it really deserves to be called its own section. Also, it's one of the worst answered sections traditionally, right? So last year, for example, the average student got 4.1 out of 11 on question 9, 2.6 out of 8 for question 10. I mean, it's tempting to sort of, ignore it, considering it's very tricky, but it's actually one of the biggest topics collectively. These two questions are 1/6 of the entire exam. So it got me thinking, well, if you have, say, roughly 6 assessments, one of them should probably be on this. And fortunately, the new study design has this particular type of assessment, an analysis and evaluation of a chemical innovation, etc. That's essentially question 9 and 10. So it's really it's forcing us really to prepare the students to do question 9 and 10 much, much better. And for those of you who aren't familiar, by the way, I realized I skipped over this. Question 9 is where you're given a student's investigation results. And usually they've done things wrong, and it's a page and a half of they've drawn the graph wrong, the table's wrong, they didn't control for variables. And then you have to comment on the validity, just as Carolyn was saying, the accuracy, the precision, the reliability. I'll get onto that in a moment. Then question 10 is where you're given much less of a stimulus, a very small stimulus, and you're expected to free write. And they'll just say, they'll give you 2 little bullet points or 3 little bullet points. I remember the 2019 one was something to do with biofuels. The 2022 one, Northern Hemisphere, was on biofuels as well. It was something like assess petrodiesel versus biodiesel, which one is better for the environment? And they just had a couple of prompts, very, very short stimulus. And then you have to write, over a page. The students are really bad at this. So, the new Oxford books have the resources you need to train the students in this. You can gain a lot of marks in this section if you train the students well. And, there will be an assessment on this. It's one of the bullet points. It's one of the types of assessments. So do use this, and hopefully your students' scores will improve. Now, on the slide, I've written reliability and then crossed it out deliberately, right? So there's that page on the VCA website called measurement terms. And I'm sure we've all been there at some point. It's where we go to look up the definitions of accuracy, validity, precision. And then there's this weird paragraph where you'd expect to find reliability, because that's what's in the study design, but it says something about repeatability and reproducibility. It turns out that reliability was for the current study design. The new one, reliability, is being replaced with repeatability and reproducibility. So we'll have to assess those as separate concepts next year. All right, yes, next slide, please.
Yep, cool. Thanks so much for your insights on internal assessments and any tips you had around planning for that. We'll move on to part 3, which focuses on planning for external assessments.
All right, thank you, Alina. So I've been giving this advice to students for years, right? But this is the 2 things you have to do as a student in order to prepare for external assessments, right? So number 1 is note-taking, because it is no secret that there is a certain amount of rote memorization, and the high achievers know this. They'll come to chemistry class with their history flashcards and the psychology flashcards. It's integral, and as much as we like to say that rote learning is outdated, it's not. You do actually have to read the book, make notes on it, make a new set of notes based on those notes, and remember quite a lot of content before you are going to excel. So half of preparation is note-taking, and I seriously believe that. Using the textbook is the first step, right? Making your own notes, as I said, and then making notes based on those. Personally, I did a 3rd set of notes in the form of posters, just with felt pens and things, but students find their own ways of doing it. But reading and making notes is half of the job for preparation. And the other one is just tons and tons of practice questions, preferably practice exams. That's what you want to build yourself up to. So the Oxford Chemistry for VCE books include ample practice questions, and they're all of different types. You've got things like skill drills, which are the quick comprehension questions, and then you've got the challenges which extend students' understanding and combine different skills into one. You've got checkpoints in the Oxford's books, and then you've got unit reviews as well, and these emulate the written examination very closely. And then, of course, you've got the practice examinations provided by Oxford's products as well. So these test 2 entire units. So the students will be very well prepared, and they've got probably more questions than they can finish between these Oxford questions and also the VCAA past papers as well. So yeah, 2 things: note taking and tons of practice. The students will get back to you like, yeah, some topics are more memorization, things like organic chemistry, and some there's less memorization that's more about practice. So things like spectroscopy or section C. Section C is almost all practice, but overall it's roughly 50-50. Note taking from the book, and then practice. And that's what I say to kids. Okay, so these unit reviews, which are pictured there, they're an excellent external assessment support tool. We've got a few different parts to see. There's part A, which is where you revisit and revise. So this is a unit summary that directs students to relevant pages in the textbook so they can revise their content properly. The test your understanding feature includes exam style questions, about 1 or 2 of them per dot point. So everything is completely covered. And I think Carolyn wrote those. Is that right, Carolyn? She might be, yeah, she's unmuting.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Noise from planes overhead. Yeah, I wrote the unit 3 and 4 unit reviews as well.
That's wonderful. So you've got those. That's the revisit and revise section with those questions. You've also got part B, which is called exam essentials. And then we go, there's an image. So this is 2 to 3 exam tips. And this is something extremely valuable where students can, especially for things like those more extended written answers, you can see how to take your mark from 2 out of 4 to 3 out of 4 to 4 out of 4. Things like which keywords to use, exactly how to answer the question and link it back to the question, which students struggle with time after time. When you look through the examiner's reports and you see how students did on these multi-mark questions, the ones that are out of 5 or 6, very few of them get full marks. It's sometimes 1% will get the full marks on those big questions. But this is going to help them thinking like an examiner, trying to get them into getting every single one of the check boxes that the examiner is looking for. So that's really valuable. That's part B, exam essentials. Finally, there's part C, right? So part C is exam practice, which is an additional 50 marks worth of examination style questions. And you've got multiple choice and short answer in there. The students will have probably more questions than they have the time to do, which is absolutely fantastic. So, all right, that's it from me.
Thanks, James. All right. Now that we've heard all that, I just wanted to sort of bring this all together and talk a bit about the series again. So these are what the covers look like pictured here. Back in June, we actually ran a product walkthrough seminar, and you can view this by scanning the QR code. So I'd encourage you to have a look if you're interested in learning a bit more. In terms of pricing and availability, all this information is available in the table here. The print and digital samples have been available for some time now. And here are the pricing and when we'll expect to have access to these. I just wanted to note that for the licensing period for the digital, the Student O-Book Pro, this one is active for 2 years before a reactivation fee applies. This is quite handy because students will have access to both units 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 across their whole VCE experience, so that if they find that when they hit year 12 there are some concepts they need to revise, they can go back to the year 11 text and review that content before they go and attempt the content in units 3 and 4. I also wanted to introduce you to our Victorian secondary sales team. So their information, email addresses and contact details are available here. So I'll just leave this up for a second in case anyone wants to note anything down, but also if you're interested in having a chat, feel free to pop your name in the chat and they'll reach out to you in some time. Cool. All right. Before we wrap up, I did want to highlight 2 upcoming webinars. So we've got a webinar next week, I believe, yes, next week, on mastering cognitive verbs in VCE biology. This one's hosted by one of our authors for the VCE biology series, Helen Sylvester. So please come along to that if you're interested in hearing a bit about cognitive verbs. And we've also got another webinar for VCE Chemistry, mostly focused around planning and mapping the new study design to your year coming up in September. So please take a note of these dates, and registration will be open either open already or it will be open soon. With that, we'll just move on to Q&A. So if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat and I'll make sure that we address them. We haven't got anything in there at the moment, but I've received some questions ahead of time, so I might ask those first. So the first question we have is, do you have any tips for developing rubrics to assess students? I just also wanted to note that, Carolyn, you're muted, so just, yeah, perfect.
Just one thing that pops to my mind is keep it transparent, share the rubric with the kids and have it given to them at the same time as the instructions for the task. And just, you know, in my experience as a teacher, I have seen it where the instructions say include these aspects in your report or poster, and the rubric is slightly different, and the kids don't like that, right? So yeah, or there's something just pops up in the rubric that was never asked of them, right? So give whatever it is, just give the rubric at the same time as the instructions, and all should be fine.
Also make the rubric explicit. Feedback. Sorry.
There's a bit of an echo, I think.
Yeah, I would actually make the instructions of the rubric very explicit as to what you want the students to do, and make sure that you specify what is at standard, what's going to be below and what's going to be above for extension.
Yeah.
Perfect. I haven't got anything in the chat at the moment, but I've got another question. So teachers are expected to build in sustainability concepts into at least one of the 4 mandated SAC types. Do you have any recommendations about how to do this? Sustainability concepts.
Yeah, I don't know if you tried the 2022 Northern Hemisphere paper yet, but their question 10 was on petrodiesel versus biodiesel. And that brings out a completely different skill set, because students, what I'm noticing is students doing bio and environmental science are giving quite different responses. And it's your chance really to show outside knowledge actually inside question 10. So yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting one. The mark scheme is not out yet, and I wasn't marking the paper, but I would not be surprised if both opinions would be marked as correct. That is, petrodiesel is better for the environment or biodiesel is better for the environment. But it's an interesting one. That particular topic, I think the students somewhat care about, and they care about the environment anyway, but that one where there's an opinion to be had, it's not just rote learning a fact, is an interesting one. So you might want to explore that. That's appeared twice. I think it was Southern Hemisphere 2019 and Northern Hemisphere 2022. I think there were 2 questions 10 on that. So yeah, there's that topic, sustainability. And there's always helium as well. That's a favorite as well. You can weave helium into a SAC. Like we have that in the Oxford book as well. Kids love that one.
We've also got the ones on polymers in the organic chemistry unit. There's many ways to develop different polymers for different purposes, and one of the most common ones is the biodegradable plastics and variations thereof. Also, it's not only for that, but also for clothing as well. So that particular unit you can bring into it. There's also in the metals topic, making sure that you're going through a circular economy versus a linear economy, recycling of aluminium, bringing that sustainability concept into that one as well. So we have several topics across units 1 to 4 in the chemistry series that do take into account sustainability in all of its forms to meet that requirement in the study design.
I know that Carolyn spoke about the that's about the registrations. So thanks, Steph, for posting that in the chat. There's no links to registration for the 2 webinars that we mentioned. So these 2 here. So feel free to register. We've got another question. Do you have trackable assessment? Yes, so I think this is more of a question for publishing. Rather than trackable assessment for the SACs, the internal assessments, that would be more, I guess, handled on the school side of things. The Chemistry for VCE series and the Oxford digital platform has a I'll just go back while I speak. Yeah, so our platform has a assessment tracking system where you can so students have access to a lot of digital quizzes, and as they complete the quizzes, this will populate an assessment table, so you can import your classes into that system and you'll be able to view all their scores there. So you can track from the key knowledge level, see how students are performing against each individual dot point, as well as how they're performing on the more bigger area of study level. So you can access the product walkthrough webinar here. So it was good timing that you asked to see the QR code. There's a more thorough walkthrough of the print product as well as the digital platform, and then you can see how the assessment works there. There's another question. Are there any worksheet type resources? I want my kids to practice handwriting in preparation for the exam, but throughout the year. This is very valid, considering that for the exam, they're sitting there for a couple hours to answer the questions. The students will have access to, so we mentioned all the skill drills, challenges, check your learning questions, and all the other question types in the student book. On the digital platform, you'll be able to download worksheets that students can print off and fill in there. So the answer to that is yes. There's another question for the authors. So for you, Carolyn and James, with the new 600-word limit for the Unit 4 poster, do you have any suggestion on where students should direct most of their content? A really good question.
That is a good question. I would suggest the analysis and the discussion of the results. Because it's such a very tight word limit, most of that content should be around talking about what you got, how you got it, and any errors. So all the errors that we spoke of earlier from the VCAR study design, accuracy, precision, repeatability and reproducibility, most of those marks for that poster will be just gone on that part alone. I would try and summarise the procedure in as short a word count as possible, and same with your materials. I think what is not included is your acknowledgements and your references. But yeah, most of that part of the poster should be about what you got for your practical investigation.
I 100% agree. And, you know, just from experience in different schools, the biggest differentiator in the rubric for any poster will be that section. It'll be the discussion and analysis section. Yeah, that's where to focus.
Thank you. Were there any more questions? Looking pretty good. Last chance. So once again, if you want a bit more information about the series, including a walkthrough of all the features in the student book as well as the digital features, just scan this QR code and you should be able to access the recording of a previous webinar. All right, if there isn't anything else, we can wrap this up a bit early today. So I just want to take a moment to thank our speakers, James and Carolyn, for their time today and for giving us some really great insights into how to help prepare students for success with the new VCE Chemistry study design. So thank you both. And also thank you everyone for attending today.